Well, good morning, everyone. This is Celeste Carmichael. I work in Extension Administration and Program Development and Reporting. I want to welcome you to today's Campus County Connection webinar series. We're going to focus today, as you know, on high tunnel agriculture and extending the growing season. We're going to be here today with Judson Reed, and really excited. I think this is a topic that a lot of people are certainly interested in, and it's certainly a topic that Judson has spent a lot of time with. So you may know a little bit about the Campus County Connection webinar series, but I always try to take a moment to help folks that are new to listening to the series a little bit about what we're trying to do with this. As you likely know, Cornell Cooperative Extension is uniquely placed between research and extension, being out with the communities and the people of New York State. Where we are richest and finest and where we work the best is where we have that nice integration between research and people. And so the Campus County Connection webinar series is really intended to broaden your horizons, help you know a little bit more about something happening that blends the research and extension together very well. It's really intended to broaden you on a wide basis, broaden the peripheral knowledge of our listeners. So it may not be a skill builder, but a connector to help you know a little bit more about people working out in the field or opportunities to do really unique and rich extension work. So with that, I am going to pass the virtual ball over to Judson Reed. Judd, are you there?
I'm there. Thanks, Celeste. How's my volume?
Great. Yeah, sounds great. So before you get started with our topic, if you could introduce our listeners to a little bit about your background and how you got involved in extension and your research topic, that would be great.
Sure. How did I get involved in extension? Boy, that's a good question. I needed a job. I graduated from Cornell University and began working in Yates County. This is where I'm broadcasting from this morning. Beautiful downtown Penn Yan. I hope it's beautiful wherever you are. So I started in extension working with vegetable growers in this region, and the use of unheated greenhouses or high tunnels really took off in this area as a result of some demographic shifts and an increase in vegetable production. And this county now is the leading vegetable greenhouse county in the state. And so, although I didn't start out with that as my assignment in extension, it kind of developed into my specialty. And over the years, we've broadened out the program where now we have activities throughout the state, different research projects looking at nutrient management, pest management, on-farm profitability of greenhouses or high tunnels. Is that what you're after, Celeste? That was a bit off the cuff.
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I think it's always good for folks to know, how we all get into this work of extension and, what kind of background we have and what drives us and what interests. I know personally, when I didn't really know a lot about extension when I first took a job in extension 25 years ago, but I met all kinds of people that were just so excited and enthusiastic about the work that they did, and so that's what kept me in my career. I think it's always good to share those stories.
Sure. Thanks. Well, for me, Celeste, extension is really about helping people, and I enjoy helping people, and I think it's very meaningful to have a job where you can do that. And for me, I happen to enjoy working with plants, working with soil, applied biology in a sense. So using horticulture as an opportunity to help people, for me, is what I do in extension. I really enjoy that. So I'm going to get into our topic now. Enough of my personal philosophy and background. just so that we're all on the same page, I'll do a quick definition of what is a high tunnel. A high tunnel is a type of a greenhouse. It tends to be a lower technology type of greenhouse, often with a single layer of plastic or polyethylene, generally not a forced heating system, and passive ventilation compared to automated ventilation with fans, and almost always soil-based, but not always. We are not very dogmatic about this definition, and at times I wish we didn't even have the term high tunnel. I wish we just said greenhouses. This is a type of greenhouse, and it tends to be on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of technology. We also do a lot of work with people who have advanced heating systems and ventilation systems. And to the right on the slide, you can see a typical high tunnel in New York State, representing about 1/10 of an acre, somewhere around 4,000 square feet, and that is in St. Lawrence County. Is there anyone on this webinar from St. Lawrence County? Yeah, there's Paul Hetzler. I see Paul. Paul's one of our cooperators up in St. Lawrence County. Awesome to see Paul on here today. Moving forward. So I think, Celeste, are we able to throw up our poll now? What we want to do is see what is the most common tunnel crop in the county or region where our attendees are working. And I've done my best to throw up what I think are probably the most common ones, but maybe there's some that I've missed along the way.
So everyone should see a poll that's open. If you can take a moment to just respond to that poll, that would help us know a little bit more about your experience. They're responding, Jed.
Oh, they are. I can't see that. Okay, yep, thanks for letting me know, Celeste.
Yep, you won't know until I close the poll here. Sure. Looks like and I'm going to press close poll right now. That'll give the 5 of you remaining that haven't responded just a couple of seconds here. And there you go. Can you see that at this point?
Yeah. So let's see what people said. Most common is tomatoes, 44%, greens, and then berries, and then we had 5 people who didn't answer. So tomatoes are the most common one in this response, and that's consistent with my experience, followed by greens. And what I meant by greens, maybe I should have defined that, but that could be lettuce, spinach, kale, many different types of Asian greens. Here are some greens grown typically in the wintertime, and this is on the left Swiss chard, and then some kale, and then some arugula moving left to right. And this picture I took in Washington County in eastern New York in January, and you can see that the Swiss chard there is somewhat wilted, and that's typical, but as the day warms up, that will perk up and be ready for harvest. So when we talk about greens, generally we're talking about a wintertime crop, and it is always exciting to see something this green in the middle of the New York winter. We can also grow flowers inside of a high tunnel. Here we have petunia baskets hanging over a tomato crop. This is here in Yates County, my home county, and there are more and more people I work with growing flowers inside of high tunnels. Cucumbers, no one responded in the poll that they are the most common tunnel crop in your county. Maybe I should have worded that poll differently, but what are some common crops? Cucumbers are a growing crop in high tunnels, are growing in popularity, I mean to say, and economically, when we've looked at cucumbers, they can do very well if someone's a good marker. But finally, the crop I wanted to highlight is tomatoes, and this is mainly what I'm going to talk about today because this is what I know the most about. And tomatoes, as many of you know by now, give us a yield response inside of high tunnels, a quality increase, dramatically decreased foliar disease with a couple of very important exceptions to that. We trellis them vertically, or we are able to trellis them vertically, and that allows us to harvest sunlight way up here. Let me try to use my highlighting tool. I just can't grow a crop. Oh, that's not working. This high outside in the field. So in a sense, by growing tomatoes or cucumbers inside, I'm able to increase the magnitude of my crop by growing it vertically, and tomatoes allow me to do that. On an economic scale, tomatoes are generally advantageous in tunnels because they're sold by weight and they have a high retail value. Now, those are the crops that we generally see inside of high tunnels. I will mention berries a little bit later on in the presentation. What we've seen statewide is a dramatic increase in high tunnels. Incredible. So we estimate probably over 500 New York State farms with some form of protected cultivation. Protected cultivation is a fancy way to say greenhouse or high tunnel, or possibly even low tunnels. The estimated value of that is $6 million, and that's coming from New York Ag Statistics. And since 2009, the USDA has really been behind a lot of that growth, and they've funded hundreds of projects statewide. And you notice I'm somewhat ambiguous there in my figure and say hundreds because I didn't want to put it in print, but I'm guessing that somewhere around 300 projects statewide today. So this has been an incredible increase in the number of acreage in the state, but more importantly than the acreage is the number of operators, the number of people who are growing inside of high tunnels. Now, I'm going to look at our attendee list again because it keeps on changing and see what counties are joining us. All right. Now, in my previous slide, I noted that the USDA has funded a number of these projects statewide through what they call their EQIP program. And they do that through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS. There's an NRCS office covering every county in the state, with a possible exception in New York City. And NRCS, as the name implies, is about conserving natural resources. So when this program began, it was somewhat puzzling how a resource conservation service would be involved in subsidizing agricultural equipment. And the justification for this was that tunnels, high tunnels, improve soil health. And this is a quote I took several years ago from the USDA. Tunnels cover the crop. You are making better use of nutrients, fewer pesticides, fewer chemicals, and you're seeing better soil quality as a result. This is how the USDA, through NRCS, began to justify subsidizing high tunnels throughout New York State and nationally for that matter. Soil quality. So, Celeste has just popped up our next poll. Would you agree with that statement? Would you agree that tunnels improve soil quality? So we give you three options there: yes, no, or you're uncertain. I'm going to take a drink of water.
Well, Jed, this poll is really piquing people's interest because we've got a quick response on this one, and I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and then show you how people.
So we might. There was a warning there that said your answer may be recorded. Now it just says the poll has ended.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. So when you close the poll, it gives everyone a few more seconds to respond, especially if they are in the middle of a response. So there you go. You should be able to see the responses at this point.
I can. Okay, so we have a minority that agreed with that statement that tunnels improve soil quality. Only 3 out of 19. No said 4 out of 19, so very similar response rate, 16% versus 21%. And then the majority, almost half, are uncertain about whether tunnels improve soil quality. And then 3 people did not answer. So this is interesting. Let's explore this concept now that really has fueled high tunnel growth in New York State over the last 5 years. This is a NRCS-funded high tunnel site. I won't mention the county in this case to protect the guilty. But going back to that concept of improving soil health, this high tunnel was put up in an area downslope from equipment storage and a number of barns and grain bins, and as a result saw quite a bit of lateral runoff. And you can see here, see if I can highlight this, this edge of the greenhouse, or this edge of the high tunnel, is really at the same level as the field soil outside. And as a result, this is downslope and collected quite a bit of excess water. It was poorly drained. You can see the high tunnel operators attempted some emergency drainage operations, making canals, ditches just to get rid of this. There used to be a full tomato crop inside of this high tunnel, but plant by plant, they began wilting and dying. Here is after the ground has dried out, the health of some of these plants. You can see the one on the left is healthy. These 2 here in the center of the slide are wilting. And they were diagnosed with a root zone disease. I think we found Pythium in those roots. Pythium is a water mold. And what happens when we get diseases in our crops? We apply fungicides. In this case, you can see the plant has been thoroughly coated with a foliar fungicide. So if we go back to the concept that these high tunnels are to improve soil health and decrease pesticide usage, we can see in this case the absolute opposite happened. We severely impaired soil quality on that small piece of land. As a result, the grower applied additional pesticides which were not helpful and unnecessary. So a high tunnel in and of itself will not improve soil quality. In fact, it is more likely to degrade soil quality in our experience than improve it. And we use that one case as an example. So, as we saw an increase in tunnels throughout the state, and oftentimes the tunnels were poorly sited or not managed properly by these new operators, we started a number of grant-funded projects to try to educate growers and high tunnel operators on what they could do to avoid these problems. The first BMP, or best management practice, that we produced was on site selection, and there is a URL here on your slide that will take you to this PDF. This was developed by a woman I work with, Elizabeth Buck. There, at the end of our presentation today, we'll have a number of these resources highlighted for you. Celeste has done a great job of putting those on the Campus Connections website, and she'll walk us through some of that at the end. So this is an example of an update on the type of programming that myself and a number of cooperators throughout the state are involved in at the moment, trying to promote proper site selection so we can avoid the degradation of soil quality. Okay, so we're back to another poll question. At this point, I would like to ask the participants, what do they think are the biggest challenges, or in this case, what is the biggest challenge that tunnel growers face in your area, in your county or your region, where you're working with people? Is that SWD? Is it nutrient management? Is it soil-borne diseases? Or, as in the case of certain unfortunate counties, too many extension meetings?
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So there's a couple of folks that may be in the middle. If you want to work on finishing that, that would be great. All right. And Judd, you should be able to see the result.
Again, that's great. Okay, soil nutrient management came in as the highest, 50%. Soil-borne diseases is 17%, but then second place, too many extension meetings. Oh, no one said that, no answer. Is 1/3 didn't answer. So soil nutrient management came in 50%. And you know, Celeste, maybe I biased that a little bit by showing those shocking photos of a poorly managed high tunnel. But that's an interesting response. No one said SWD. Must be we don't have any berry growers on the line.
Well, and Judd, there was a comment that came in earlier that high tunnels seem to accumulate salts, hard to flush out. We only use manure and compost, no chemical fertilizers. And, you know, and somebody else that commented that it really depends on how you're managing, you know, managing all of the nutrients that are coming in. So I think it sounds like people have had some of these experiences to help them know.
Yeah, thanks, Celeste. That's interesting feedback. I would agree. In the end, a high tunnel or a greenhouse is really just a piece of plastic and steel with some hardware. Really what matters is how do we manage that situation. So I appreciate people providing those comments. I'd like to talk a little bit about what I see are some of the major challenges with high tunnels. And one of the major challenges is just how successful they can be at increasing revenue. What we're looking at right now is revenue over time from June 16th, 2014 until November 3rd, 2014. And this represents typically our harvest window in a high tunnel in New York State. Could be shorter, could be longer, depending on where you are. What you'll notice is a very steep increase in revenue, and this is real data taken from a cooperating farm here in Yates County, with a very precipitous drop at the beginning of August. So what we found was that 50% of all revenue, tomato revenue, on this farm occurred before the end of the first week in August. This means for high tunnels, which extend our season and allow us to have a harvest earlier on in the calendar window, they really help with on-farm revenue since tomato prices are higher before that first week in August. So how is this a problem? Well, the problem is that since they generate so much revenue so early in the season, farmers grow tomatoes year after year after year in the same soil. As a result, we run into root zone diseases, which showed up in our poll a couple slides back. In this slide, we see a tomato root that is infected with the disease Fusarium. So Fusarium is a root zone disease that accumulates over time in the soil and then causes the plant eventually to wilt. You'll also see in this slide in a very important set of hands. That finger belongs to one of our plant pathologists in Geneva, Chris Smart. Chris is someone that I rely on for a lot of disease diagnostics and discussion on how we can effectively manage high tunnel diseases. So Chris is one of several resources I'm going to mention this morning, and Chris and I are also doing hopefully some work with some other diseases in the future. So after learning and properly diagnosing Fusarium here in this tomato root system, what can we do? This is a plant infected with Fusarium. You can see these wilting symptoms above ground here corresponding to those below ground symptoms. This disease doesn't go away. There's no fungicide that can solve that problem. It's going to be in the soil and require a long-term rotation to get away from infected roots. So I'd like to highlight 3 possible solutions to the continual cropping of tomatoes or any other vegetable in high tunnels. Those 3 are grafting, production in containers, and crop rotation. You'll notice I said container production and not pot production. Okay, let's start with grafting. Grafting is the combination of a very vigorous rootstock or disease-resistant rootstock of a tomato, and then we simply splice it onto a fruiting variety, or what we call a scion, to create a new plant. And we don't have time to go into the whole process of grafting, but the result is a very vigorous crop that can withstand Fusarium in the soil if we select the rootstock and increase our yield by increasing the water efficiency of the crop. And here is another resource I'd like to highlight. This is a screenshot from a YouTube video produced by Jim Monahan. Jim Monahan is a videographer that works within Cornell Cooperative Extension and has produced a number of outstanding videos, not just for my program, the Cornell Vegetable Program, but also for people such as the Finger Lakes Grape Program. So I encourage you to go ahead.
I'm sorry, can I interject for just a second? So,
yes.
And you were probably just about to say this. Where would somebody be able to find these videos? Would it be on the Cornell Vegetable Program website?
That's a great question, Celeste. They could go to the Cornell Vegetable Program website. They could go to YouTube itself and just type in this case, it looks like someone typed in my name in grafting. You can do this in Google too. You could just type in my name. But I'm the 3rd most famous Judson Reed. Apparently there's someone in a rock band. He has a lot more hair than me, so he'll be easy to distinguish. There's another Judson Reed that I think was in the Civil War. I I don't quite dress the way he does, but eventually you would get to me, and then you could come up with this video. Probably the best thing to do is go to YouTube and type in Cornell Vegetable Program. So one of the things that Jim highlights in that video is that grafting inside of a high tunnel by reducing these root zone diseases can increase our profitability. In this case, we're suggesting by $60,000 an acre. So that's one way to deal with root zone diseases or continual cropping inside of high tunnels. And they're not only, there are two videos there on grafting of tomatoes. One goes into the potential motivations and benefits of it, and the second one is actually a detailed how to do it. And there's also a link to a fact sheet in that how-to video. So I'd strongly encourage people to check out those grafting videos. I'm intentionally glossing over the nuts and bolts of the process this morning. Again, moving on to container production in high tunnels, not pot production. I'd like to talk about how this can also be a solution to some of the problems we're seeing. Celeste, can you see the drawings I'm doing here?
Not yet.
Not yet.
There we go. Now I see. That must be a container, Judd. Is that right?
Thank you, Celeste, and thank you for using the right vocabulary. Yes. You notice I'm drawing 3 of these. These represent containers or bags or pots or whatever we want to call them. And in 2014, we did work with a private company and one of our excellent campus collaborators, Neil Matson. Neil Matson is in the Department of Horticulture. And Neil and I both conducted studies looking at the production of tomatoes in a high tunnel and comparing in-ground production to growing inside of containers. And we looked at 3 different types of containers. Those containers were rigid plastic, black polyethylene, and a felt material. Within each one of those types of containers, we looked at a 5-gallon, a 7-gallon, and a 10-gallon container. And again, our motivation here is to look at, are there ways to avoid growing continually in the same soil? So if we were to grow in one of these 5, 7, or 10-gallon containers, we could start with fresh potting soil every year and avoid the buildup of pathogens in the soil. But we needed to look at how does this work for us economically? So Neil and I did this work, and now you should be seeing a chart or a table that shows our inputs, the cost of those inputs, such as containers, potting soil, ground cover, plastic mulch, straw, and then our gross, or what was our total revenue. I'm circling it here for in-ground production. And then what was our net? That does not include labor. That just includes material inputs. So you can see how we performed in our in-ground. And then the smart pots, I'm moving across the, let's see, the top row in 3, 5, 7. That should be 5, 7, and 10 gallon. This is a mistake. Where it says 3, 5, and 7. That should be 5, 7, and 10. I just picked that up now. Smart pots are a felt type material. We had a black polyethylene bag in 5, 7, and 10, and then a rigid plastic. So if we look at what is our return on investment, we can see that our felt materials really didn't do very well. Here, in a 3-gallon, and a 5-gallon, and a 7-gallon, all pretty poor. The rigid plastic also didn't perform as well as in-ground if I look at 5, 7, and 10-gallon pots. But now if I look at my polyethylene bags, I find that my profitability is actually comparable to my in-ground profitability, particularly here in the 7-gallon containers. Celeste, do you think that's, go ahead.
I have a question for you. So the one thing that's not, that you can't see in this graph, right, is what happens if disease hits, right?
Sure.
So that's not accounted for here. This is just like on a good year, everything's doing well, and this is the net at the bottom, right?
That is correct, Celeste.
Okay. So if disease, you know, if you include disease in this, are you going to talk about that a little bit?
I might.
How that changes? Yeah,
that could definitely change things. If we had, say, a foliar disease in there, that would change things. If we had, we're assuming that by bringing in fresh potting soil on a yearly basis, we should be able to avoid root zone diseases. Not always, but it's a huge step forward versus growing in the ground year after year. What else can I say about this? I think I'll leave that there. So this is an option. This is what I want to highlight here, is that growing in containers inside of a high tunnel is an option compared to growing in the soil year after year.
So Jed, I'm just going to go to the questions here for a second. There's a few that maybe we can talk about during the time that we're doing the next poll, but one really refers to the cost, and that was why were the bags so much more profitable than rigid for the same size? Cost difference of pots doesn't nearly make up the difference.
Yeah, let me take a quick look. Sure, let's take a quick look. So our felt pots are, let's see, here's our container expense. Here is our, so we understand that container expense on the felt materials. If we look at the poly bags, oh, yeah, so what's not included in this, to explain that, what's not included here is that we have dramatically higher yield in our containers, particularly poly bags, early in the season. So one of the challenges in doing these webinars is that Celeste Carmichael is very strict about the number of slides that you can put into a presentation. So sorry, Celeste. So anyway, I could have put in more slides about yield and price, but if we think back to that one slide that showed tomato price being so much higher, or revenue being so much higher early in the season, a lot of what explains the advantage with the container system is that those tomatoes grown in a container ripen sooner. Excuse me. Why is that? Well, it's fairly intuitive. The root zone is warmer, is above ground, and those plants grow quicker earlier in the season and mature fruit sooner. Their overall yield may be more or less compared to in-ground, but they mature sooner and their fruit is worth more because of when it's maturing. So I hope that answers the question as to why the performance was that much better. Celeste, if I throw out a question, can you see answers to it?
I can, yes.
All right. So I would like to ask the participants what is this crop? Do you know, Celeste?
Oh, sure. Put me on the spot.
Just look at
Is
the
it
foliage.
sorghum? Corn? Ginger. Look at that. Okay, so these are the responses coming in. Ginger?
You got it, ginger.
Mm-hmm.
Sorghum. Wow. Celeste, what was your background before you got into administration?
Oh, will you stop it?
It wasn't agronomic crop.
No.
Okay. No, that's not sorghum. That is ginger, which brings me now to the third of those possible solutions to continual tomato cropping, which is crop rotation. So, working with a couple of great people in the northeast corner of New York State, Amy Ivey, who's with the Eastern New York Horticulture Team, and Mike Davis, who's our farm manager at the Cornell Willsboro Research Farm, we conducted work looking at rotational crops in high tunnels. The concept being, just as we rotate crops in our fields or in our gardens to avoid the buildup of pathogens in the soil, we looked at different crops that we could grow inside of a high tunnel to rotate with tomatoes. Now, we know we can grow just about anything we want inside of a high tunnel. The question is, can we grow it and have an economic performance that is similar to tomatoes? So that's what we were after, and ginger being one of several that Amy and Mike and I were looking at. Here is the ginger, and what we're really harvesting here, this is on a cooperating farm in the Hudson Valley, is the rhizomes or below ground portion of the plant, which is really a baby ginger. It's not the type of ginger you'd see in the supermarket, which can be stored. This is a ginger that's meant to be consumed in a fresh market sense. So the way that we grow ginger, it is dropped in the ground. In this case, this is our the Cornell Willsboro Research Farm. Probably in late May, we have to sprout it in the late winter, early spring, and then drop those rhizomes in the ground, and then hill them, similar to hilling potatoes over the season. And then late in the year, since this is a tropical crop, say September, October, we can begin to harvest this baby ginger. Moving forward, I said we need to look at crops that perform similar to tomatoes, or at least competitively with tomatoes. And what was nice in this project is that we found that cucumbers can perform well compared to tomatoes, not as good as tomatoes, but basil and ginger also perform similar to cucumbers. But ginger I'd like to highlight because it has a much lower labor input than these other crops. And if growers have a market for ginger, it could be a viable rotational crop, given that it doesn't share pests and diseases with tomatoes. We base this data on average yields and retail prices, and this is work that was also, I also want to highlight a woman I work with, Cordelia Hall, contributed to this data. So Celeste, I think we're ready for another poll.
Okay, the next poll is up, and while folks are answering that, I'll go through some of the comments that came. Can you see, if you click on the chat, I don't know if you can see that directly, Judd, or if you want me to read those?
Let me see. Let's see. I only see, let me look at this. Yes, I wasn't looking at this. Let me look now.
That's okay. No, I'm happy to share those.
Why don't you pull one out that you think is, why don't you pull one out?
Okay, so Paul Hetzler had commented that this year we noticed an accumulation of crust salts on the top of our soil in 1 or 2 beds. And Justin Trico also said, I also see an accumulation of crust on the top of our soil and our raised beds inside our greenhouse. So do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. So salts do accumulate in high tunnels, and the other thing that accumulates often in high tunnel soils is calcium bicarbonate. And I think I'm going to stop there, Celeste, because if I speak more to it, I'm kind of answering a poll question.
Okay, all right, there we go. Let's see, there's another couple of questions that came in. What about moving the high tunnel itself? Is that a common practice in New York State?
You know, Celeste, I don't think it's a common practice. It is probably one of the better options to physically move the structure onto fresh soil, but it is practiced, I would say, rarely, not as often as it should be.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share the poll results.
Thank you. Okay, so the most common answer was that crop rotation is a viable soil management option for high tunnel growers. No one said it was not, although 32% were on the fence, saying perhaps it is a viable soil management option for growers. So to get back to that question about salts and bicarbonate accumulation in a high tunnel, we are continuing to irrigate and fertilize every one of the crops that is on this list. So unless we're taking other management options, crop rotation may, more than anything, help us with diseases by changing families of fruits or vegetables that we grow inside of a high tunnel. But we're continuing to add nutrients and irrigation water. And both of those bring with them more than what we're seeking. They bring more than simply plant nutrients. They also bring salts. And irrigation water also brings solids with it, sometimes salts and bicarbonates. So crop rotation is an option often for disease management. It is less of an option for nutrient management. So I'd like to move on to that concept of managing nutrients inside of a high tunnel. We're looking at now the results of a foliar nutrient test from a cooperating high tunnel in Ulster County in the Hudson Valley. By pulling leaves from our crop and testing them for our nutrients, we can monitor the nutrient status of the plant over time. So we can begin with looking at nitrogen and looking at the nitrogen level in the plant starting in May and going through to August. In some cases, we would go to September with this. We can see that the blue line shows a downward trend with a slight spike in, looks like early July. The solid green and the solid red line represent acceptable levels during the vegetative stage or early growth of the plant, and the dotted green and the dotted red line represent acceptable levels during the fruiting stage of the plant. And we can see a general downward trend with nitrogen over time. Phosphorus on this farm was almost always below an acceptable level. And then potassium was also remarkably low. So, Celeste, what do you think is happening when we see a spike, for example, here with nitrogen or here with potassium in the plant's foliar nutrient level? What do you think made that spike occur?
Well, I think you should ask the participants here, Judd, because, you know, after my sorghum answer, I'm not going to respond again.
So what's going on here as we see those spikes in those levels?
Anybody want to respond there? Water source.
Water source?
That's what's coming in. Anybody else? Other thoughts?
Well, it's really not that complicated. Probably what's happening is what we do is pull these samples and the results go to the grower. And so probably the grower was seeing that their nitrogen level was dropping, and all of a sudden here they said, I need to apply fertilizer. And so fertilizer was applied, and then the nitrogen bounced up again, and then they got busy and stopped reading those results that we were sharing with them, and those levels continued to decrease. So that's probably what explains that spike, is that in this case, the cooperating grower made some type of correction in their irrigation water, as Justin suggested, with injecting some fertilizer in that water. I also want to point out here that calcium is above the line the whole time. So this is a picture of Crystal Stewart, one of our cooperators. Crystal's also a member of the Eastern New York horticulture team. And Crystal is pulling a foliar sample in one of our cooperating high tunnels. So we're doing this project with, right now we probably have, between this and several other projects, close to 30 sites across the state where we're pulling soil samples and foliar samples and then meeting with the growers and talking about how we can properly respond to those deficiencies that we see. In this photo, we have Elizabeth Buck to the left. Next to her is Crystal Stewart, Amy Ivy, and to the right is Emily Cook, one of our educators from Ulster County who works with organic growers. And then to the far left, we see a couple of our very important farm collaborators, John Paul Pertens and Sue Deckers. And much of what we learn comes from some of the very intelligent and successful farmers that are involved in our project. In this case, that includes John Paul and Sue, and we're going over these nutrient tests. You can see that here in the center of the photo on farm, and talking about ways that we can best respond to these. I want to highlight some other outstanding resources that we have within our system at this point, particularly when it comes to the production of brambles or raspberries and blackberries in high tunnels. A couple of our faculty members, Marvin Pritz in Ithaca and Courtney Weber in Geneva at the Experiment Station, have done a lot of work researching how high tunnels can benefit these crops inside of, well, in high tunnels. And they have an outstanding resource online that describes the process of growing those crops inside and some of those benefits. Talking about online resources, I'd like to mention that the Cornell High Tunnel webpage includes a lot of information on growing vegetables as well as cut flowers. And another important campus connection has been Chris Ween in the Department of Horticulture. I'm not supposed to say department anymore, right? They're sections. So Chris Ween in the section of horticulture has been an important contributor to our High Tunnel webpage, which is about to be revamped with help from Craig Kramer, also in the section of horticulture. I would be remiss if I didn't mention another important contributor to all this work, which is my coworker Nelson Hoover here in Penn Yan, who hosts a number of our trials. This is a picture of Nelson's High Tunnel here in Penn Yan, where we do a lot of our work. I also want to have everyone have their eyes open for an exciting project that Betsy Lamb in New York State IPM is putting together along with myself and Amy Ivey and Brian Eschenauer. And this is going to be I think a 2 or 3 year project where we conduct professional development around pest management in greenhouse and high tunnel vegetables. And we're going to be putting together a number of webinars and in-person trainings over the next 2 years. And we are looking for county educators, regional specialists, anyone within the system who wants to improve their professional development around pest management in high tunnels. I hope you'll tie into that project that Betsy is leading.
So Judd, I see that you've got a Twitter, you've got your Twitter handle up on the screen right now. That's one way people can follow up with you and stay tuned. Is that right?
They're welcome to follow me on Twitter. Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So I'm going to just, kind of wrap this up with a couple of resources related to the Campus County Connection webinar. But while I'm going out to get that website, there were a couple of other questions that you might want to respond to that came in.
Sure, you want to do that?
Yeah, one was about resources to acquire cheap high tunnels, donations, or do you have any suggestions about that? And also related to cost, there was a question that came in that said we've had our high tunnel for 3 years and the plastic's in need of acquiring new plastic covering. Is there a resource where I could purchase this as we were awarded a grant from the Cornell University to receive the greenhouse? So why don't you go ahead and respond to those as I go to the next couple of slides and resources.
Sure. Let me start with the easy one, someone looking to put plastic back on their tunnel. Let's see, I would say here in New York we have a great resource, Souders Produce Supply, here in Penn Yan, 315. I'm typing this in, 536-2160, and I'm going to, hopefully that went out to all participants. Yep. If you want to buy plastic, but so I avoid favoritism, here are some other places. Robert Marvel online, Rimmel, also online, Rimmel Greenhouse would have plastic as well. And I think Belterre in Wayne County, New York also might have greenhouse plastic. So there's a number of options. What was the other question, Celeste?
And of course, I shut it down. But it was asking about resources, ways to get a greenhouse low cost or resources like that. So maybe these resources that you're putting up, I don't know if there's grants or other things that our educators or associations could look for that you might want to point to.
Sure, I would say. Go ahead, Celeste.
Oh, I was just going to ask if some of these resources or a connection to these resources might be on your on the Cornell Vegetable Program Greenhouse and Tunnels page.
Yes, I think we do have a list of suppliers on there. I know the Berry people also have a list of suppliers for all of these. Encourage people to check out those web pages. In terms of grants for high tunnels, NRCS would be where I would start. So every county has an office for Natural Resource Conservation Service, and that's where I would suggest people start.
Okay, super. I really want to thank Judd and thank everybody that tuned in. Are you looking at my browser? Can you see my browser now?
Yes.
Okay, super. The thing that I want to point out is that all of these resources from the Campus County Connection webinars are posted online. So this webinar is being recorded, and a recording of the webinar will be posted on this page that you're looking at. These are available through, so this is the staff site of Cooperative Extension, so just staff.cce.cornell.edu. And if you go to units, I'm part of the Organizational Development and Accountability Unit, and the top link on our page under Tools of the Trade. This right orange section is Campus County Connections, and all the previous webinars are listed there. If you click on any one of them, resources are there, slide presentations are there, as well as the recording and any web links. So if you would like to follow up or look more closely at the resources that Judd shared with us today, they're there. I'll also point out that we have one more upcoming webinar for the Campus County Connection series in this season, which ends in June, and that's the formation of heart clubs, healthy eating and healthy eating and activity in rural towns through civic engagement. So that one is a 4-H and healthy living related topic. We're looking for topics for next season, which begins in September and runs through June of 2016. So if you have suggestions on topics that do a good job integrating research and extension, please do send them to me, Celeste Carmichael, tjc17@cornell.edu. So Judd, thank you very much. I don't know if there's any other wrap-up that you want to do or anything to share in closing.
No, but I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, and I'd like to thank you, Celeste, for organizing this and everything you do for Cooperative Extension, including the Campus County Connections.
Thank you. All right, everyone, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.